October 24, 1942. Guadalcanal. The jungle breathes in the darkness. Humid air hangs like wet canvas over Henderson Field, thick with the rot of vegetation and the copper tang of blood. The rain comes in sheets, turning the volcanic soil into black mud that clings to boots, to weapons, to skin. Somewhere in that impenetrable darkness, beyond the wire and the rain, 3,000 Japanese soldiers are gathering for what they believe will be the decisive assault of the Pacific War. Sergeant John Basilone crouches behind his Browning M 1917 heavy machine gun, water streaming down his face, his hands already raw from the gun's scorching barrel. He's 26 years old, 5'8", 160 pounds soaking wet, which tonight he definitely is. Around him, 15 Marines hold a position that should be defended by a company. They are the thin line between the Japanese 29th Infantry Regiment and the most important piece of real estate in the Pacific Theater. The machine gun nest sits at a critical junction near the Lunga River. If this position falls, Henderson Field falls. If Henderson Field falls, Guadalcanal falls. If Guadalcanal falls, the entire American offensive in the Pacific collapses. Basilone checks his ammunition belts for the 100th time. The .30 caliber rounds glisten with rainwater. In the foxholes to his left and right, young Marines, some barely 18, grip their rifles with white knuckles. They've been on this godforsaken island for 2 months. They've seen friends torn apart by artillery. They've contracted malaria, dysentery, dengue fever. They're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options. Then it begins. A scream tears through the jungle. Not English. Not a battle cry exactly, something more primal. Banzai. The word multiplies across the tree line like a demonic chorus. Muzzle flashes erupt in the darkness. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Basilone's thumb presses the trigger. The Browning erupts with a staccato roar that drowns out the rain, the screams, everything. Brass casings arc through the air, steaming as they hit the mud. The barrel begins to glow a dull red in the darkness. This is where legends are born. This is where Italian-American kid from Raritan, New Jersey becomes immortal. This is the story of Manila John. John Basilone was born on November 4, 1916, in Buffalo, New York, the 6th of 10 children in a working-class Italian immigrant family. When he was 5, the family moved to Raritan, New Jersey, where his father Salvatore worked as a tailor and his mother Theodora kept the chaotic household together through sheer force of will. Raritan, a mill town, a place where Italian, Polish, and Irish families worked the factories, attended church, and dreamed their children might have better lives. Young John wasn't much interested in those dreams. School bored him. The routine of small-town life felt like a cage. He was restless, hungry for something bigger than the narrow streets of Somerset County. At 15, he lied about his age and joined the army. 18 months later, when the truth came out, they gave him an honorable discharge and sent him home. But the seed was planted. Basilone had tasted something, adventure, purpose, brotherhood, that civilian life couldn't provide. In 1934, at 18, he enlisted again. This time, no lies necessary. The army shipped him to the Philippines, to Manila, where he served with the 31st Infantry Regiment. For 3 years, Basilone lived the exotic life of a colonial soldier in the Pacific. He boxed in regimental matches, a light heavyweight with quick hands and an iron jaw. He became a champion. The other soldiers started calling him Manila John, and the name stuck like glue. But boxing wasn't enough. In 1937, he came home, tried civilian life again, worked as a truck driver, labored on a golf course. Each job lasted a few months before the itch returned. Something was missing. That brotherhood. That sense of being part of something greater than yourself. So in July 1940, John Basilone walked into a Marine Corps recruiting office in Baltimore and enlisted. He was 23 years old and starting over. Again. The Marines broke him down and built him back up at Paris Island. But Basilone wasn't like the other recruits. He'd already served. He'd already seen foreign shores, thrown punches in the ring, stared down authority. The drill instructors recognized something in him, a natural leader who didn't need to shout to command respect. By June 1942, he was a sergeant. By September, he was boarding a transport ship bound for the South Pacific with the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, 1st Marine Division. His destination, a malarial, jungle-covered island that most Americans had never heard of. Guadalcanal. The first American offensive of World War II began on August 7, 1942, when 11,000 Marines stormed ashore at Guadalcanal. The objective: capture the airfield the Japanese were building and turn it into a dagger pointed at the heart of the Japanese Empire. They took the airfield quickly, renamed it Henderson Field, but holding it was another matter entirely. The Japanese poured reinforcements onto the island. Destroyers shelled the Marines every night. Japanese bombers attacked every afternoon. Disease ravaged both sides. The jungle itself seemed determined to kill everyone. By late October, both sides were preparing for a decisive showdown. The Japanese assembled their largest force yet, 3,000 veteran infantry soldiers, supported by artillery and tanks. Their mission: overrun Henderson Field in a single overwhelming night assault. Imperial General Headquarters had already announced the capture of Guadalcanal to the Japanese people. This was supposed to be a formality. Sergeant Basilone commanded 2 heavy machine gun sections, 4 guns, 15 men, positioned along a narrow front at a critical junction near the Tenarue River. If the Japanese broke through here, they'd roll up the entire defensive line. October 24th. The day was quiet. Too quiet. Marines checked their weapons, cleaned their rifles, tried to sleep. Some wrote letters home. Basilone inspected his guns, ensured the ammunition was properly linked, verified the fields of fire. He could feel it coming, the way you feel a storm building in your bones. Night fell like a curtain. The rain began around 8 o'clock, a tropical downpour that reduced visibility to a few feet. By 10, it was a deluge. Water filled the foxholes. The ground became soup. Then, at 10:30, the preliminary barrage began. Japanese artillery hammered the Marine positions. Mortars walked up and down the line. The jungle erupted in flame and shrapnel. When the barrage lifted, the silence lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then they came. 3,000 men, screaming, charging through the jungle darkness with bayonets fixed. The first wave hit Basilone's position like a tsunami. He opened fire, the Browning hammering out 600 rounds per minute. Tracers cut luminous lines through the rain. Bodies crumpled in the muzzle flash. But for every man who fell, 2 more appeared behind him. The gun overheated within minutes. The barrel glowed cherry red, then white hot. Basilone grabbed the barrel with his bare hands to change it. The metal seared his palms, leaving burns that would scar him for life, but there was no time for pain. He slapped on a fresh barrel and kept firing. The Japanese kept coming. Wave after wave. Suicidal in their courage, fanatical in their determination. They clawed through the wire. They leaped into the foxholes. Marines fought them with bayonets, with knives, with entrenching tools. Basilone fired until 1 gun jammed. Then the second gun ran out of ammunition. Around 2 in the morning, the situation became critical. All 4 machine guns were silent, jammed, broken, or out of ammunition. Japanese soldiers were overrunning the position. Basilone made a decision. He grabbed as many ammunition belts as he could carry, hanging them around his neck, his shoulders, his waist, nearly 100 pounds of linked .30 caliber rounds. Then he ran. Through a jungle crawling with enemy soldiers. In pitch darkness. In pouring rain. Over ground slick with blood and mud. He ran 200 yards to the ammunition dump, loaded up again, and ran back. Twice. 3 times. Delivering ammunition to guns that would have fallen silent without it. When he ran out of ammunition to deliver, he fought with his Colt .45 pistol. When he ran out of pistol ammunition, he picked up a machete from a dead Marine and fought hand-to-hand in the darkness, killing Japanese soldiers who got too close to his position. For 15 hours, from 10:30, at night until 2 in the afternoon the next day. John. Basilone held that position. When dawn finally broke, the Marines could see what they'd been fighting all night. Bodies, hundreds of them, piled 3 and 4 deep in front of the machine gun positions. The Japanese 29th Infantry Regiment had ceased to exist as a fighting force. Of the 3,000 men who attacked, nearly 2,000 lay dead. The Marines had held. Basilone sat on a pile of spent brass casings, his hands burned and bleeding, his uniform soaked in a mixture of rain, sweat, and blood, not all of it his own. He'd fired more than 12,000 rounds. He'd killed 38 enemy soldiers, personally, verifiably, undeniably. When his commanding officer found him, Basilone looked up and said, "I need more ammo belts for my guns." 3 months later, in Australia, Major General Alexander Vandergrift pinned the Medal of Honor on Sergeant John Basilone's chest. The citation read, in part, "For extraordinary heroism and conspicuous gallantry in action, Sergeant Basilone, in charge of 2 sections of heavy machine guns, fought valiantly to check the savage and determined assault. Serving his guns personally, he repaired and serviced them and returned to his gun, fighting boldly and with utter disregard for his own safety." John Basilone had become the first enlisted Marine to receive the Medal of Honor in World War II. He was famous, and he hated it. Being a hero was hell. That's what John Basilone discovered when they shipped him back to the United States in August 1943 for a war bond tour. The Marine Corps had plans for him. America needed heroes, living, breathing symbols of courage to sell war bonds, to keep morale high, to remind people why their sons and husbands were dying on remote islands in the Pacific. Basilone was perfect for the role. Handsome in a rough-hewn way. Working-class Italian kid made good. A genuine hero whose exploits sounded like they came from a Hollywood script. The Marine Corps put him on trains, on stages, in parades. They sent him to factories and shopping centers and town squares across America. Manila John drew crowds wherever he went. Women swooned. Men wanted to shake his hand, to touch the legend. Children asked for autographs. Politicians wanted photos. The Marine Corps wanted him to smile, to tell sanitized stories about Guadalcanal, to convince mothers that sending their boys into the meat grinder was noble and necessary. But Basilone couldn't smile. Not really. Not while his brothers were still out there, dying on beaches with names like Tarawa and Saipan. He'd shake hands and sign autographs, but his mind was always elsewhere, in the jungle, in the darkness, with the men he'd left behind. The guilt was crushing. Here he was, safe, sleeping in clean sheets, eating hot meals, while Marines were getting torn apart by machine gun fire. The war bond tour felt like cowardice dressed up as patriotism. The Marine Corps offered him a commission. Lieutenant Basilone. A desk job training recruits stateside. Safety. Stability. A guarantee he'd survive the war. He turned it down. They offered him a celebrity position touring bases, boosting morale. He turned that down too. What John Basilone wanted was to return to the fleet, to get back in the fight. But the Marine Corps had invested too much in his image. Manila John was worth more alive than dead. They needed their poster boy. Then, in July 1944, something changed his mind, temporarily, about staying stateside. Her name was Lena Ridgey. She was a sergeant in the Marine Corps Women's Reserve, stationed at Camp Pendleton in California. Dark-haired, intelligent, with a smile that could light up a room. She was volunteering at a parade when Basilone's motorcade passed through. Their eyes met for maybe 2 seconds. He was smitten. It took him weeks to find her, to arrange a meeting. She thought he was arrogant at first, cocky, full of himself. But when they finally talked, really talked, she saw through the legend to the man underneath. The restless, driven, deeply conflicted man who carried Guadalcanal on his shoulders like a physical weight. They fell in love fast, the way people do during wartime when tomorrow isn't guaranteed. Weekend dates became daily letters. Letters became plans. By early 1945, they were married in a quiet ceremony at St. Mary's Star of the Sea Church in Oceanside, California. Lena gave him something he'd never had before, a reason to want to survive. She represented a future beyond the war. A home. Children. Growing old. All the normal things that soldiers dream about in foxholes. For a moment, a brief, shining moment, John Basilone had everything. The Medal of Honor around his neck. A beautiful wife by his side. The respect of an entire nation. He could have stayed. The Marine Corps would have let him sit out the rest of the war. No one would have blamed him. He'd already done more than anyone could ask. He'd earned his peace. But Manila John couldn't do it. Couldn't sit safe while the war still raged. While Marines younger and greener than him were preparing for the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific Theater, the invasion of Iwo Jima. They needed experienced leaders. They needed men who wouldn't break under fire. He requested a return to the fleet. Not as an officer. Not as a celebrity. As a gunnery sergeant with the 5th Marine Division, 1st Battalion, 27th Marines. Lena understood. Maybe that's why he loved her. She understood that part of him that couldn't rest, couldn't settle, couldn't turn away from the fight. She kissed him goodbye at Camp Pendleton in December 1944. She knew, in the way wives know things, that she might never see him again. John Basilone knew it too. Camp Tarawa, Hawaii. December 1944 through January 1945. The 5th Marine Division was green, newly formed, full of replacements who'd never seen combat. Many had enlisted after Pearl Harbor, motivated by patriotism and Hollywood's version of war. Now they were training for the reality. Gunnery Sergeant Basilone threw himself into preparing these young Marines for what was coming. He ran them through machine gun drills until their hands bled. He taught them how to clear jams under fire, how to coordinate fields of fire, how to stay calm when the world was exploding around them. But more than tactics, he taught the mindset. How to function when exhausted. How to push through fear. How to look after the Marine to your left and right, because that brotherhood was the only thing that would get you through the horror. The young Marines worshipped him. Here was Manila John, the legend from Guadalcanal, treating them like equals, sharing his expertise without condescension. He'd sit with them during breaks, tell stories that weren't about his heroism but about the ordinary Marines who'd held the line, who'd done their jobs despite the terror. He never mentioned the Medal of Honor unless someone asked. And even then, he'd deflect. "I was just doing what any Marine would do," he'd say. And he believed it. The officers recognized what they had in Basilone, a natural leader who led by example rather than authority. They put him in charge of a machine gun platoon in Charlie Company. His mission: provide heavy weapon support during the initial assault on Iwo Jima. Intelligence briefings painted a grim picture. Iwo Jima was a volcanic island 8 square miles in size, dominated by Mount Suribachi at the southern tip. The Japanese had fortified it with 22,000 troops, hundreds of pillboxes, miles of tunnels, and artillery pre-sighted on every inch of the beach. It would be the bloodiest battle in Marine Corps history. The invasion was scheduled for February 19, 1945. D-Day. H-hour. 0900. In the weeks before the invasion, Basilone wrote letters to Lena. He told her about the young Marines he was training. He told her he loved her. He told her he'd come home. He didn't tell her he had a bad feeling about Iwo Jima. On February 16th, the convoy left Hawaii. Basilone stood on the deck of the USS Missoula, watching the islands disappear over the horizon. Around him, Marines played cards, cleaned weapons, tried to sleep. Some were writing what they knew might be their last letters home. Basilone checked and rechecked his gear. Machine gun barrels, ammunition belts, grenades, demolition charges. Everything had to be perfect. Lives depended on it. On February 18th, the Navy began the preliminary bombardment of Iwo Jima. Battleships and cruisers pounded the island with thousands of shells. Aircraft dropped hundreds of tons of bombs. The island disappeared under a cloud of smoke and coral dust. Marines watching from the transports allowed themselves a moment of hope. Maybe the Navy had done its job. Maybe the landing wouldn't be so bad. They were wrong. February 19th, 1945. 0830 hours. The Amtrak circled in the choppy water, waiting for the signal. John Basilone sat with his machine gun section. 20 Marines crammed into a metal box that smelled of diesel fuel and fear. The ramp would drop in minutes. They'd wade through the surf onto Red Beach 2, on the western slope of Mount Suribachi. The men were quiet. A few prayed. Others stared at nothing. Basilone checked his watch. 30 minutes until H-hour. He looked at the faces around him. Kids, most of them. 18, 19, 20 years old. This was their first combat. Their first time under fire. Some would be dead within the hour. "Listen up," Basilone said, his voice cutting through the engine noise. "When that ramp drops, you move. Don't bunch up. Don't stop. Get off the beach as fast as you can. Stay with your fire teams. Watch your sectors. And remember, you're Marines. You can handle this." They believed him because he'd been there before. Because Manila John had held Henderson Field against 3,000 Japanese soldiers and lived to tell about it. If he said they could handle it, they could handle it. 0900 hours. H hour. The ramp dropped. Sunlight flooded in. Basilone charged forward, boots splashing through shallow water, onto black volcanic sand that shifted beneath his feet like ball bearings. For a moment, maybe 10 seconds, there was nothing. No gunfire. No explosions. Just the sound of thousands of Marines hitting the beach, the officers shouting, the engines of the Amtraks. Then Iwo Jima woke up. Machine gun fire erupted from Mount Suribachi and the ridges beyond. Mortars began falling. Artillery shells screamed in from camouflaged positions. The beach became a killing field. Marines fell in windrows. The black sand soaked up blood like a sponge. Men screamed for corpsmen. Others lay silent, staring at the sky with eyes that would never see again. Basilone's section made it off the beach to the first terrace, a 15-foot rise in the terrain that offered minimal cover. But the advance had stalled. Tanks were stuck in the soft sand. Infantry couldn't move forward under the withering fire. The entire assault was grinding to a halt. That's when Basilone made his move. He spotted a concrete blockhouse 50 yards ahead, a Japanese strongpoint with a machine gun firing down the beach, slaughtering Marines as they came ashore. It had to be destroyed. Basilone grabbed a demolition charge and sprinted toward the blockhouse. Bullets snapped past his head. Mortars exploded around him. He zigzagged across the open ground, hit the deck, rolled, came up running. His Marines provided covering fire, pouring rounds at the Japanese firing slits. He reached the blockhouse, slapped the demolition charge on the reinforced door, pulled the fuse, ran. The explosion was deafening. When the smoke cleared, the blockhouse was silent. The machine gun fire stopped. Marines pushed forward through the gap Basilone had created. But the battle was far from over. A Sherman tank sat immobilized in the sand, its crew buttoned up inside, unable to see the terrain. Japanese soldiers with magnetic mines were crawling toward it. Basilone ran to the tank, climbed on top, pounded on the hatch until the commander opened up. For the next 30 minutes, Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone stood on top of that tank, exposed to enemy fire, directing its movement through a minefield and up to the first airfield. He guided it through terrain so treacherous that without his direction, it would have been destroyed. Marines who saw him that day said he was fearless, invincible, that he moved through the battle like a force of nature. But John Basilone wasn't invincible. He was just a Marine doing his job. Around 1,100 hours, Basilone was moving along the edge of the first airfield with his machine gun section. They were setting up a new position when the mortar fire started again. The Japanese had excellent observation from Suribachi. Their mortar crews walked their rounds across the Marine positions with terrifying accuracy. Basilone and 4 other Marines dove for cover. The explosions were deafening. Coral and sand rained down. When the barrage lifted, Basilone stood up, shouting orders, organizing his men. Then came the sound. A whistle. High-pitched. Growing louder. The mortar round landed 5 feet away. The explosion killed John Basilone instantly. He was 27 years old. He'd been on Iwo Jima for less than 2 hours. 4 other Marines died with him. February 19, 1945. On the same day John Basilone died on Red Beach 2, Lena Basilone was at Camp Pendleton, working her shift at the motor pool. She didn't know yet that she was a widow, that her husband, her partner, her love, was gone. The telegram arrived 3 days later. She'd been expecting it, in a way. You don't marry a man like John Basilone without understanding the likely outcome. But expecting bad news and receiving it are different things. She buried her grief in work. The war still needed to be won. Marines still needed to be supported. She'd mourn later, after victory. On Iwo Jima, the battle raged for another 34 days. The Marines captured Mount Suribachi on February 23rd, the flag raising that became the most iconic photograph of World War II. But the rest of the island cost them dearly. Nearly 7,000 Marines killed. Another 20,000 wounded. John Basilone was buried in Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. His coffin was draped with the American flag. The Marine Corps band played. A color guard fired a 21-gun salute. Hundreds of Marines and civilians attended. For his actions on Iwo Jima, Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone was awarded the Navy Cross, the Marine Corps' second highest decoration for valor. The The citation describes his extraordinary heroism in guiding tanks through minefields, destroying enemy installations, and leading his men under fire. John Basilone remains the only enlisted Marine in World War II to receive both the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross. The only one. But his legacy transcends medals. In the years after the war, the Marine Corps named buildings after him. Streets, schools, a destroyer escort, USS Basilone. His hometown of Raritan holds a parade every September in his honor. And in every Marine Corps recruit depot, drill instructors still tell the story of Manila John, the tough kid from New Jersey who held the line at Guadalcanal and died leading from the front at Iwo Jima. What makes John Basilone remarkable isn't just what he did, but why he did it. He could have stayed home, could have ridden out the war in safety with his new wife, his celebrity status, his guaranteed survival. But he went back. Not for glory, he'd already had his fill of that. Not for medals, he had the highest one his country could give. He went back because his Marines needed him. Because young men he'd never met were facing the same terror he'd faced at Guadalcanal, and they needed experienced leaders to show them how to survive. John Basilone chose duty over safety, brotherhood over self-preservation, the mission over his own life. That's the essence of the warrior ethos. Not the violence, not the aggression, but the willingness to sacrifice everything for the people beside you. Manila John understood something fundamental about leadership. You can't ask men to follow you into hell unless you're willing to lead from the front. He never asked his Marines to do anything he wouldn't do himself. And in the end, he paid the ultimate price for that principle. Lena Basilone never remarried. She spent the rest of her life honoring John's memory, attending reunions, speaking to young Marines about the husband she had for less than 7 months. She died in 1999, 54 years after that telegram arrived at Camp Pendleton. Today, when young Marines struggle through boot camp, when they face their first firefight, when they're tempted to quit or give up, their instructors tell them about Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone, the working-class kid who became a legend, the hero who went back to war when he didn't have to, the Marine who died doing his job. His story reminds us that heroism isn't about superhuman ability. It's about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when circumstances demand it. It's about making the hard choice when the easy one is right there in front of you. John Basilone made the hard choice. Twice. At Guadalcanal, he chose to stay at his gun when he could have retreated. At Iwo Jima, he chose to return to combat when he could have stayed home. Those choices cost him his life, but they also made him immortal. The black sands of Iwo Jima claimed Manila John's body, but his spirit, that restless, courageous, duty-bound spirit, lives on in every Marine who faces down fear and does the job anyway. That's his legacy. That's his legend. That is Manila John. In memory of Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone, United States Marine Corps. Medal of Honor. Navy Cross. Purple Heart. November 4th, 1916 to February 19th, 1945. Semper Fidelis.